This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I'm your host today, Kara Szymborski, here with Kate Lamphere.
Hi.
And Kate Scotchless.
Hello.
And we have a very exciting topic today. We will be talking about properties that are not yet comic books that we think should be comic books. But first, how have you guys been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Kate Scotchless.
I have been good. The second semester is underway, and it's good. It's good to be back in the saddle and have a standard routine. You people with anxiety know what I'm talking about. So I'm back in the groove, and I also, since last I was on the podcast, acquired a kitty. I adopted her from a rescue in Ann Arbor, and she is the cutest and the best. And so for you listeners out there who thought that you had the best cat, I'm sad to inform you that my cat is the best cat. But I read some comics over break that my advisor lent me, actually. He is really into comics as well. And I asked his favorite, and he said Strangers in Paradise by Terry Moore as his favorite, like, property or whatever, right? And so he lent me the first few volumes, and I read the first one, and it's progressive for 1993 when it was first published. But man, there is some intense cringing action that happens when you read it in today's day and age, which is a little like, oh, why did my boss tell me to read this? But
do you have an example?
There's just like, there's sexual violence, there's domestic violence, and sometimes it's not handled in the best way. It is a slice of life comic by Terry Moore, who does Rachel Rising. And it's progressive in the sense that one of the main characters is a lesbian, which is cool. And there's, LGBT relationships and all that stuff. But I've heard that it gets better. I, in fact, was promised, was made to promise that if I borrowed it, I had to at least read the first 2 volumes, not just the first one, because the first one's pretty mediocre.
Kate,
yeah.
Did you really just say it gets better about an LGBTQ book plotline?
Okay, but hear me out. Like, and that's part of the part that was cringy. It's like, oh yeah, there's representation, but also it's like the most stereotyped, like, butch lesbian, wild and out there, like, yeah. She's very, like, strong and aggressive, and, like, you can tell she likes women because she behaves like a man.
Wow.
Yeah. So
yeah.
it's a story is like this love triangle between 2 women and 1 man. And apparently this slice of life, like, dramedy then veers into the crime genre later. So that'll be interesting to see where that goes. I hope they just kill this dude because he's, like, beating up one of these women and pressuring her into sex and cheating on her and stuff. So, yeah, it's a weird comic to have recommended and lent to you by your boss, I'm gonna say. That was, but yeah, I am still gonna read volume 2 as I promised, and the art is like black and white cartoony stuff because this is all drawn and written by the same person. So I'm interested to see how it evolves, and if volume 2 is in fact better. So
I am dying to hear your report of what you tell your advisor your thoughts were
I
about
already
this.
talked to him about this. I was like, it was okay. And he's like, yeah, that was my experience of the first volume too. And then I kept reading and it was better. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm curious when it turns into a crime genre series. Like, that's a funny turn for a slice of life comic. So we'll see. But it went for a long time. I think it had like a 90+ issue run. So,
all right.
Yeah. And isn't Rachel Rising still ongoing? I don't actually know for sure.
It's one of those books that will just be there forever in some version,
yeah.
in some way.
Well, apparently, Strangers in Paradise was mostly self-published. So that's a cool and interesting thing that it was mostly self-published and also went for that long. So,
yeah, cool.
How about you guys?
Well, Kate Lamphere, how are you? How were comics for you this week?
Good. I have read enough that I found two things that I wanted to talk about, which is really surprising. Usually I only have one thing that stands out. But the first one was A Bride's Story by Kaoru Mori and William Flanagan, who translated the manga. And I picked this up from the library because I loved the cover. It's set in like a 19th century Silk Road area, so it's kind of historical, but it's a slice of life, fictionalized story. And a woman from a nomadic tribe is married off to a very, very young man. He's like 10 years old. And there's like this kind of awkward, funny cultural difference like section of the book where they're figuring out how to like live together, and like his family is really huge, and luckily it avoids the really creepy potential issues with having a child being married, and especially because the woman is like 10 years older than him. But they avoid that entirely. It doesn't even come up, and it actually becomes like a problem, like, well, they haven't done the thing, so they're not actually married. And anyway, they actually have like an adorable, like innocently affectionate relationship that I imagine would grow into a loving marriage, hopefully like 10 years down the road. But
is this like an Anakin Padme thing? I'm getting an Anakin Padme vibe.
I think it's more.
What does he feel like about
adorable.
sand?
I think he's probably okay with sand because they live in the desert, and he hasn't complained
you never
about
know.
it.
They can be from a
That's
desert
true.
planet, you know.
Yeah. But all the characters in this are great, including the grandmother, who becomes very affectionate of the bride and really stands up for her. And then the bride goes and teaches all of the other women how to shoot bows and like go hunting for rabbits. And then, of course, that comes up and they have to defend themselves. And it's just all of the ladies like encircling this like other tribe of men that have come and showed up, and they're all like holding bows and arrows. It's really good. So there's more of this, and I really hope that my library has more of it. Otherwise, I'll be going to my local comic shop and hoping that they carry it.
Cool ladies with bows is right up my alley, so this sounds good.
That description was very different from what I was envisioning from the title.
Yeah.
Like you said, the title is A Bride's Story, and I'm envisioning like, oh, is this like a frothy rom-com drama, like Wedding Planner or something in that genre? Because I could be into that. And then we're at nomadic tribes, women defending themselves, and I'm like, still on board, but for different reasons.
Yeah, it's really good. I really like the historical aspect of it. Like the artist is really into like the fashions, and then like the craftsmanship of them, like carving the posts for their houses and stuff like that. So they've really showed like how life was back then in this area. So it's really neat.
Nice. What else did you read?
It's called The Spill Zone, Volume 1 by Scott Westerfeld. He's written a whole lot of other books, including like the Uglies series.
Yeah.
And then it's illustrated by Alex Povolind, and the colorist is Hilary Sycamore. And I have really liked this author's prose books. He's really good at writing leading ladies, and I really like the supporting characters and things in his books too. And so the plot line of this book is that something has spilled out of somewhere and caused a whole lot of areas around the world to kind of like go like bonkers in terms of reality and physics. Like there's whole sections of this entire city that was affected by this that are just like entire streets are just flat, like one-dimensional flat. And there's other areas where there's like floating stuff in the air that has like artistic patterns in it. And then animals are kind of like wandering around, and they're not really doing animal things other than like staring at the people that enter this area, and their eyes glow. And of course, it's a very dangerous area. And of course, our protagonist has to go into it to, of course, do something for her kid sister that she's now in charge of, kind of like Katniss Everdeen. And there's a more like dramatic plot shift toward the end of the book, and it kind of ends on a cliffhanger. So there's more of the series, thankfully, and I'm pretty sure that it's out. So I've got two more series to track down.
All right. So for me, my current status is desperately trying to rewrite the New Year's resolution boat because I looked at, so I was looking at my finances from 2019 because that was like my project last year, was kind of getting my finances on track and like actually working with a financial advisor who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so I've actually been like paying attention to how I spend my money. Whoa. What? Who does that? So I was looking at my like budget trends for 2019 since I started working with this advisor in like late January last year. Mm-hmm. And I realized that one of my largest areas for spending was clothing, which like blew my mind because I was like, what? No, I've definitely been spending more on like healing my ankle and like buying ridiculous makeup collaborations. But no, like I actually spent a lot on clothing. And then it's one of those moments where you look at all the purchases and you're like, oh, this was all me. None of this was like I was hacked. It's all choices that I made. But like in my defense, I needed shoes and I wanted sweaters, and those are expensive things. So I was like, all right, 2020, we're not going to spend this much on clothing. Like, this is ridiculous. You have enough clothes. Calm down.
Spend it on comics.
No, and no. And I immediately broke my like intention / resolution because all of a sudden I was confronted with all of these really cute Sailor Moon shirts.
Oh no.
And so now I have 3.
Oh my God, Kara. Where do you put all your clothes? You're living the California lifestyle.
I'm living in a box. I am in a box.
Yeah.
No, okay, what happened was it was like about the time, I guess, in my clothing life cycle where I've actually just worn so many of my clothes into the ground.
Okay, so you were able to get rid of stuff.
Well, yes, and this past year was really like me buying clothes to kind of like replace the clothes where I'm like, ooh, this should have been thrown out a while ago, kind of thing.
I have that too. But they're also the comfiest t-shirts, so
I know. I'm wearing my favorite one right now while we're recording. It's my Jupiter Ascending one with the 3 Channing Tatums howling at Jupiter.
Oh my God.
But like that has now become a sleep shirt because I don't think I can wear it out in public anymore.
Yeah.
But so I got these Sailor Moon shirts, and like I was explaining to a friend, in my defense, like when I was in middle school and getting into the Sailor Moon manga, and like spending way too much of my time as a high schooler pre-social media era, like looking at eBay and all these like fan sites of all these like Japanese import sites where you could get these Sailor Moon things that they were like making in the 90s and you could only get them in Japan. I spent so much time just looking at Sailor Moon stuff I wanted to buy but never did and couldn't. And now that I like have a little bit of expendable income and Sailor Moon is like cool again, I like can't stop myself. I like need to own the things that I wanted to own when I was 12 and couldn't.
That seems fair.
Right?
Okay, so I would say have a limited amount that you budget every month for more clothes, and you just spent this month's on, instead of
Sailor
going
Moon
cold
shirts.
turkey, yeah. That's how I do it with books. I'm like, I can't cut myself off completely. I've tried that. And so instead of just going hog wild because I give up, I'm going to just limit it.
Yep. Nope. I'm good. And they were all cheap. I got 2 t-shirts for $10 each, and then a long sleeve shirt I had a coupon and got for $20 in free shipping. So I feel like I'm doing great.
Yeah.
So, all right, comics. So we could talk about my Sailor Moon spending habits all day. But all right, so if you have Netflix, you've probably seen ads for their new show, The Witcher, as I did. And I was like, oh, probably that's something that I'll be interested in, but I really want to watch some other stuff first. So I'll just kind of like leave that at the back of my head. And then that dude said that thing that got some article traction where he was like, this is unrealistic because ladies can't sword fight. And I was like, okay, now we're watching this show because if it has women sword fighting and quote unquote acting like dudes, I'm like, and if by acting by dudes, this guy was like, they curse and they just tear meat with their teeth and that's unrealistic. I was like, sir, you're describing me as a person if I could also sword fight. So now I'm very interested in watching this series. And I saw
is it any good?
I haven't started yet because I'm that person who wants to read stuff before watching stuff.
Okay, so hear me out. So I was in a work meeting, and the only other female at this work meeting, right, because computer science, was talking about liking this new Witcher show. And a guy was like, oh, I saw that. A guy who was a good boy. These are all good boys. So like our good boys on the show. So anyway, he was like, oh, I heard that, I haven't been watching it because I heard that it's really like sexist. And she's like, or like misogynistic or whatever. And she's like, well, I'd say it's more just like aggressively heterosexual than it is sexist.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Okay, that is a distinction that I also
true.
acknowledge.
All right.
So I'm very curious to hear your interpretation. Is it in fact misogynistic or just super hetero?
So let's talk about the comic, because that's actually my comment about the comic.
Oh my god!
So
okay.
So I opened up Hoopla and saw that. Which, listeners, if you have a library system that has Hoopla, please download Hoopla, because you can read 5 comics for free every month, and they actually, aside from the big 2, regularly update the digital comics with frequency. It's pretty great. So they had, and they usually have like on their featured page stuff that ties into stuff that like just had a trailer drop or things like that. So it's actually a very well done system. So of course, since Witcher was on Netflix, they had all these Witcher comics, and Witcher Volume 1, Mike Mignola did the covers. So of course I tapped on that immediately. I was like, wait, this does feel like a Mignola thing, which was slightly misleading, because actually Volume 1, House of Glass, which is what I read, is by Paul Tobin and Joe Chiaro, and Mike Mignola only did the covers. However, I've read a lot of Hellboy. That's one of my favorite franchises. Like, I don't actively think about it being one of my favorites, but if you like say, what are your top 3 like favorite comic whatevers, I'll probably just be like, oh, the Hellboy stuff though. And this volume of Witcher feels very much like Hellboy comics in terms of how the story is told and paced. And like, you know how in the Hellboy comics they'll have all these little like, let's call them like breather panels, where they like kind of stop and look at a detail, or like cut to like the creepy creatures' faces, and it's just like a beat, but it gives you enough time to just kind of realize that this is sort of like a creepy, unsettling atmosphere where time passes weirdly.
Yeah.
So it was that kind of vibe in Witcher House of Glass. And so then I was looking, I was like, so in the first like page of the comic, they also have like all their copyright stuff, and like, this is based off video games. And I was like, wait, Witcher's video games? So then I had to go Google it, and I was like, oh, this comic is based off of a video game, which is based off of a series of Polish novels. And I was like, what's up, Poland? So apparently The Witcher is actually this like decades long running fantasy series of novels done by a Polish author, and it has like a huge cult following in Eastern Europe. So us Americans are super new to all of this. So thanks everyone who translated all this stuff and brought it to us in like video game form and comics and now a show and so forth. But like, I was like, yeah, what's up, Motherland? I see you. You're doing cool shit. So
I had a genetics thing last semester that part of the class was doing our own stuff with like, you know how you get your own genetics profile from like 23andMe or whatever. And then we did a bunch of population genetics using our own stuff, and that of previous students, they've kind of like built up a database of the anonymized data. And one of the cool things was it showed where in Poland I was from, which was cool.
Yo,
yeah,
that's so cool.
And it matched the family lore, which was not surprising since the family lore is, you know, recent. My grandparents came over here, but still, it was cool to be like, hey,
nice
not only did they move from there, but also the genes are from there, which isn't necessarily the same. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, it was cool.
Nice. Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yay, Polish folks. Okay, continue.
So, no, all right. So House of Glass, the basic first of all, I just want to say I am so over origin stories in comics. So it was really nice for Witcher Volume 1 to just be like, here's our main character, story is already happening. And I'm like, awesome. Because The Witcher as a protagonist, at least in these comics so far, because I've already gone into some additional ones, is very like, here's this dude who's like, man of few words and fighting monsters. And I'm like, awesome. I know this trope. Let's go. And
Yeah.
I didn't need to know like how he got his swords and like how he got his necklace thing that like vibrates when there's evil afoot, whatever. I don't care. Thank you for putting me right in the middle of the story. And so basically he's like traveling and he's found this guy who's also traveling / trying to get away from or sometimes find his wife who got turned into a monster or something. And they end up in the woods in this creepy house that's like a cursed house and full of cursed people. And there's
Like
a succubus, right? Like you do. And there's a succubus there. And she's like, just like the second I saw her, I was like, all right, dudes made this book because but like, you know, that look that women have in comics when they're drawn to obviously just be like, here is a sexy woman.
Yep.
And so that, and she's like, I get it. She's a succubus and like, that's their thing, but she's like almost immediately hitting on the Witcher and he's like not really interested. And then, of course, like later in the story, he like is interested, but he's not interested. He's like, fine, woman, I'll have sex with you. And I'm like, a dude wrote this.
Yep.
so aggressively hetero. But I am continuing to read the Witcher comics. And I'm also like, I was obviously curious about the novels that all of this came from. And it's like kind of hard to find copies of the early Witcher stories translated into English. So I guess like we have an abundance of like the filtered down stuff, but the original novel stuff is like, yeah, you could like buy it online, but like my library only has a copy in like ebook form, sort of. And I'm like, oh, weird. This is like this big franchise, but I guess that doesn't really translate to people actually wanting to read the book. No one else is a nerd like me? Okay. Okay. All right. Now that we've been aggressively hetero, what comics are you guys excited for? New comics come out on January 15th, 2020, because we are in the 20s, because that is our lives now. That is a thing. Kate Lamphere, what are you hyped for?
There's a comic called Niobe, She is Death, and number 2 comes out Wednesday, but number 1 is getting a second printing, and I haven't read that one yet either, so I'm excited about both of them. It's written by Sebastian A. Jones and Amanda Stenberg, yes, the actress, and the art is by Sheldon Mitchell. This is actually a sequel series. The first series, Niobe, She is Life. I tried to get my hands on physical copies of it for my LCS, but they were sold out and it was never reprinted. So I'm going to have to track this down in digital somehow. And the plot line is about a character named Niobe who tracks down people who stole young girls for the slave trade. So I think that she becomes like a warrior woman, but the very first issue of Niobe, She is Life shows what looks like a girl like staring out from behind bushes. And then the newest issue that's coming out on Wednesday shows this armored woman with weapons who looks like she's not going to take shit from anybody. So I have to read this prequel series and then catch up with this current series because I have to figure out how she went from girl hiding behind bushes to girl defending her people. And it's only, the first series is only 3 or 4 issues, and then this current series is only going to be 2 issues so far, so there's not a whole lot to catch up with. But the art looks beautiful. It's a person of color, female protagonist. I'm so excited.
All right. Scotchless, what do you got?
I am excited for a new graphic novel that's coming out. It's an OGN called In Pieces, Someplace Which I Call Home by Kurt Anke, I think is how you pronounce it. It's Ankeny if you're trying to look it up for a library request, like someone recently did here. It's a debut graphic novel from this person. It's written and drawn by him. And it's a series of short vignettes that are comedic, poetic, and some of them are just absurd, quote unquote, reveals the personality of the small New England town. And that's what hook, line, and sinkered me. I'm like, personality of a small New England town, give it to me. Where he lived for years with his family. And so the things that are like very atmospheric for small New England town, I get very into usually. I did live in Connecticut for a while, and I think that's why. But in general, I just like that whole vibe, I think. So I'm excited for this. It looks like it's all hand-drawn black and white, which is also can be a nice shift. Although, obviously, with the Strangers in Paradise, I've been all black and white lately anyway. But I think it's fun going from, like, what I read before that was Mr. Miracle, which is very vibrantly colored. And I don't know about you guys, but, like, I like doing that shift from one to the other and back again. Kind of like giving your eyes a break. I feel like it makes me notice the color and line work more when I'm kind of contrasting, if that makes sense.
It does. I can't say I have done that strategy before, but...
It's not so much a strategy as a thing that just happens.
It just happened.
Yeah. But it happens fairly regularly for me. I don't know why. But in any case, that's who I'm excited for. If it turns out to be a bummer, then... oh well, it's always nice to try people's debuts, you know?
All right. This week I am going to just hit all my stereotypes and say I'm hyped for Archie number 710, aka Archie and Katie Keene number 1. So it's written by Mariko Tamaki, and Kevin Panetta, and the art is by Lauren Braga. So the way the main Archie series has been going recently is basically they've kept their legacy numbering, but they kind of like highlight numbers of the parts of a story they're doing when they're doing a new story part. So like prior to this, they were doing like Archie and Sabrina, and they had like really prominent numbering over like what part it was. So you could say like, oh, this is technically the 705th book in the Archie series, but... yeah. I could dive into this story and not have to have read the prior, like, 700 issues. So it's a little weird at first, but then you kind of get what they're doing and you're like, okay, all right, I'm on board. So who is Katie Keene? For those of you who are not colossal Archie nerds, Katie Keene is the supermodel of the Archie universe, essentially. Like, she like either didn't or like super rarely has crossed over with Archie and the gang. She was always in like her own comic book. And if you look at like, I knew her from like her 80s run that they were then reprinting in like 90s double digests, where she had like the big hair and kind of like the boxier suits and stuff. Mm-hmm. But she was a more prominent character in the Archie pantheon in like, I think the 50s/60s, and all her dresses are like super feminine and like really frilly, and she has like a boyfriend who's a boxer and like another boyfriend who's like something else hyper masculine, and they're bringing back Katie Keene as like a thing because she's has a new show on the CW that starts this spring, I think, or like this month or something like that, and they're like branding her, I think, as more of like an Instagram influencer model type situation to like make it modern and hip for the new 20s kids. But it's just like, you know, what if I want to see a story about a supermodel that's in the Archie universe? Like, let's do this. Give it to me. Thank you for putting a good creative team on this book. So I'm hyped for, because like in the Archie and Katie Keene comic book that they're doing, it's basically like, this influencer is now at Riverdale High, what will happen? And I'm like, any number of things. Number of things.
I find it very funny that she's Katie Keene and we have Kate Kane in the DC universe.
Yeah, it's very, and they came out around the same time too, because Kate Kane, she was Kathy Kane, I think at the time, was like golden age Batwoman of the DC people being like, look, Batman's totally not gay. We gave him a Batwife.
That's right.
And then it was delightfully ironic that they were like, it's 50 years later and actually she's a lesbian now. So maybe they were each other's beards all along.
Yep.
All right, so that's what we're hyped for this week, January 15th, and we're going to take a quick break before we get into our main topic. All right, before we get into our main topic today, we just want to let everyone know that we are doing our last quarterly I Read Comic Books zine, and we would love for you to submit something to it. If you have a little doodle that you did while you were supposed to be tabulating a report at work or whatever it is people do at their jobs that don't work at schools, like you want to send us a little review about a comic that you can't stop telling people about, please email us at ircbpodcast@gmail.com, because we would love to include your work in our zine. And please remember to fill out the IRCB listener survey for a chance to win a $15 Comixology gift card. You can fill out our survey at ircbpodcast.com/survey. And now to our topic, which is, what stories or universes would you like to see made into comics? That was a question.
Oh, listen, Mike, we miss you. We miss you. Get back soon. Get back safe. Okay, so I think we all went very like, what fantasy books do we love? Because I don't know about you guys, but there's so much more visual element to them than just slice of life books that, to me, I end up thinking, oh wow, these would make great visual art. So I immediately went to Tamara Pierce's Tortall universe, but things like Skyrim and Harry Potter and Anne McCaffrey's dragon books would all be cool.
My first thought was Harry Potter, and my second thought was please no, and then my third thought was, but what from a different perspective? Because we already see the books kind of through. It's like a third person narrative, but we're following Harry and we only find out information as Harry finds out information.
Yeah.
Like it would be an extremely different series of books if we were, for example, following Hermione's point of view. And then I went off that and said, but what if we were following Crookshanks's point of view?
Oh my
and now I
gosh.
just really want a comic of us just following Crookshanks around during Prisoner of Azkaban and like seeing what Crookshanks sees. Because for those of you who haven't read Harry Potter, Crookshanks is Hermione's cat who is part Kneazle, which means he's more intelligent than your average cat. And Crookshanks is actually an important plot point character in the third Harry Potter book. So I would be fascinated to see a visual representation of the adventures of Crookshanks.
Alternatively, what if we got McGonagall's point of view and started back in the Marauders era, so we get like Harry's dad?
Yeah, or have Harry's mom as the main character. There's a book by Roger Zelazny called A Night in Lonesome October, and it's narrated by all of the like characters that are main characters are like the familiars, the animal familiars of all these different types of like wizards and witches and stuff like that, and that's what that reminds me of. It is a very weird book because it's all like just these dogs and cats and bats and shit talking to each other.
All right. I mean, I as a comic, I think it would work great because, you know, especially for creatures like Crookshanks who don't talk, like telling a story with pure visual, I think would do so well. Like, I mean, at that point, let's just also get the perspective of the giant squid in the lake.
That's the one I've always wanted. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Life according to the giant squid in the lake next to Hogwarts Castle. So tell me, but while we were on our mid-show break, you were both mentioning Tamora Pierce's Tortall universe. So what would that look like to you in comic book form?
I think it would be really visually stunning. There's a lot of material in it, and it includes like there's a very large world that she's created that include multiple nations and things that characters travel between. There's a series in which a character can understand what animals are saying, but that's not like a thing that everybody can do. So that could be a really cool dynamic from like a third person point of view to watch this character communicate with an animal. And there's also like some god involvement, like some of the characters have deities basically, or patrons that like they talk to occasionally or that visit them. One of them has an animal familiar. There's a lot of animals.
Yeah, I think along the same lines, like there's definitely well, because there's so many books set in that universe already, so there's a lot of material. But then it has the standard fantasy elements of like mythical creatures and stuff like that I think are very subject to artist interpretation. And then just the like when you get that kind of old timey fantasy world, the costuming can be really cool. And with the, like Kate was saying, there's different nations and cultures, and it's described very different styles of dress and kind of cultural, like different building styles and stuff like that I think could be really brought to life in a comic in a way that would be very expensive to do and not like I would love for them to get the HBO treatment, but that's never going to happen with this series. So like the comics would be the closest we could get to that kind of thing, to have it done well, and that I would be very into that.
It's also a very diverse book. Like you've got all these different nationalities that are described as being built differently or having different skin colors. So I think it'd be a really good book for our current like industry era.
Yeah. I would love for them to do the most recent, like the Numar series, just because I am significantly less attached to those books, like the, what is it, Tempest and something. But it wasn't that good, which means that I want it to be remade as a comic and the comic to be really good versus the problem you have of adaptations of books that you love, like the Wild Magic series. I would have a hard time with, I think, just because it's so near and dear to my heart. It'd be kind of like a Harry Potter comic where it's like, I want it, but do I?
Yeah. It's like, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, exactly. So
I really think that the first series, the Alana series, would be really great because it starts with her pretending to be her brother to get into night school, and then
night school, like
night school, yeah, to train as a knight.
Her associates in
and so you see like kind of upper class, her family's upper class, and then she trains near the castle, so then you get the royal family. But then she's got friends in the city that are thieves, so you get like the lowest class. Mm-hmm. And then she goes and does a lot of traveling, and she gets the goddess patron and the familiar, and there's some magic in there, and she does sword fighting. It's very good, and it would be very good as a comic.
I would like to jump off of this, like the fantasy thing, and talk about a more recent series, Throne of Glass.
I really like that series. I haven't read all of them, but I've read like 4.
I have read all of them except for the last book in the series, which just came out because I'm reading them with a coworker and she has been living her life instead of reading.
What?
So I need to all right, so I need to push her into finishing the second to last book so we can both read the last book. But so Throne of Glass is like the most cliched YA fantasy book I think ever, 100%. Which is why I love it. Like it's such garbage. Like you're like I opened it and I was like, first of all, if I was reading this when I was 14, I would be all over this. Second of all, I am 30 and still all over this because it's so bad. It's good.
It's like that catnip type of YA fantasy where you're just like,
you're just kind of like,
rub my face in
I know. You're like, I know exactly what I'm in for with this ride. So basically, the Throne of Glass series is about this 18-year-old, like, gorgeous, rich, sassy assassin. She's like, every teenage girl wants to be this girl kind of thing. Like you're reading this and you're like, I too would like to be a gorgeous independent assassin who has all these beautiful clothes but can still fight like the strongest man. Like, this sounds great. And then, like, as the series goes on, you find out like more secrets about her past that make you just want to be her more, and she's got like superpowers and like all the guys want to be with her. So of course you're just kind of like, yeah, all right, I'm totally on board with all of this, let's do this. And it's just, it would make the best manga. Like, I don't think there's a single fantasy series that deserves to be a dramatic, sparkly manga more than Throne of Glass does. Because just, like, there's elves everywhere, and there's magic powers, and there's just, like manga.
It's very over the top in a manga sort of way, too.
Exactly. Like, I can totally see this becoming, like, a fantasy shoujo manga with, like, all these little, like, pages devoted to details of all like the finery of her gowns and these full page spreads of her like entering these dramatic like ball situations where all eyes are on her, but she's in a mask and you don't know who she is. It's just, it needs to be a manga like yesterday. How has this not happened yet? And then also thinking, let's go a classic route, still kind of in the medieval fantasy realm. I would like to talk about Twelfth Night by William Shakespeare, which you all might know from the Amanda Bynes vehicle She's the Man from the mid-2000s, which is a movie that has not aged well at all. But the basic premise is that this girl, Viola, is pretending to be her brother Sebastian for reasons. So it's just like cross-dressing hijinks because she like falls in love with this dude who's supposed to be friends with her brother. And it's just like, I feel like it's a story that would work well in comic book form because much like Shakespeare's plays being read is a different experience from Shakespeare's plays being performed, putting it in a comic book form would allow the artist to create some more dramatic beats that are just lost in the act of just straight reading the script. Like that's a story that I think has a lot of moments for, like the character who's dressed as a boy looking at herself in the mirror and like contemplating what she's become and why she's doing it and everyone's reactions to her. And if someone's suspecting, you could do like a little panel off to the side of them looking suspicious. And I just feel like that is a work that would translate well to a visual medium.
I'm surprised it hasn't been adapted into a comic. There's so many other Shakespeare adaptations.
If it has, it's not in the way that I'm thinking of it being interpreted. Like, my inspiration for picking that over any other Shakespeare play is how good Prince and the Dressmaker was, where I was just kind of like, that kind of vibe, but you don't even need to change any of the Shakespeare dialogue. Just, like, keep going with that, but carry us through the story visually.
Right. That would be great.
Right? All right. What else you guys got? You got a whole list here of cool
I've
stuff.
Got Brandon Sanderson's The Hero of Ages series. I've only read 2 of the 5, I think, prose books, but this guy has so much content out there in the world, and his books are so long that there's a lot of material. And The Hero of Ages series, the first book, you've got a rogue woman, younger woman, falling into like a larger rogue group of people, and they have a sort of a magic system, but what they do is they drink different like pieces of metals, like dusted metal basically, and they burn them, and they get certain powers from these metals that are very temporary, and different metals give you different powers, and most people can only use a few of them or one of them. But you have them like the people that can push away from certain metals as if they were magnets, like they use them to parkour off of things. So you have her basically running like 20 feet above like a train, like an old school train track, like to run between cities, because she's just like super fast burning metal to run in the air over a train track.
Weird.
Yeah, no, it is a really cool, well-developed magic system that's like very unique.
And it's not it doesn't give them a chance to be overpowered because it's limited. And then later on in the first or second book, she also sees like these ghostly doubles that are like what's going to happen in like 5 seconds into the future or something. So I think that visually in a comic, that would be very cool to see how an artist would interpret that.
That would be cool.
This is kind of like beating a dead horse because I think I already mentioned this in the last episode of I Read Star Wars comic books, but I think that if we just forget Rise of Skywalker happened and instead release it as a series of character point of view oriented comic books, then everyone will know what's happening.
Yes.
Like, let's just scrap Rise of Skywalker and reissue it as a comic book from like Kylo Ren's point of view, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my solution for fixing it.
The more time I can spend with good boy Ben Solo and then not have to think about the implications of a genocidal maniac then being okay, the better.
Yep. But we're not turning this into another Star Wars podcast. I just needed to get that off my chest.
Have you guys read Shannon McGuire's work or Mira Grant's work?
Yes.
That's her pen name.
Yes.
No,
I pretty
but
much
go on.
want her entire imagination as a comic book, and thankfully she has so many prose series. It's insane, and I'm really surprised that
Don't
she
think she
hasn't gotten into
sleeps.
comics. Yeah, it's nuts. She's like the James Patterson
The
of
most
like,
prolific,
good books.
yeah.
Books I like.
Except James Patterson definitely has ghostwriters where he's just outlining and they fill in, whereas she's like legit writing all these things. Her Wayward Children series would be incredible as comics.
Yeah, those ones they're novellas. They're like maybe 120 pages or so, and they have different characters they focus on for every book. And I think that they would work really well as like 4 to 6 issue arcs.
Oh.
And then that book, The Wayward Children's, the idea is that it's like you've got Alice in Wonderland where some girl falls into a magical world and then comes back out again and has to deal with being in a real world where she's had this magical experience in a place that is where she truly belongs. It's like that, only times 1,000.
Oh.
Like all these children have different places that they're supposed to be, and all of these worlds are different worlds that like are kind of connected to one another. But anyway, so each of these arcs, each of these novellas would have a different style of world. Like visually, they could have different artists and different colorists, and it would be really stunning.
Oh, I like that idea. That sounds like it would work really well.
Yeah.
And then Mira Grant, or Shannon McGuire, sorry, Mira Grant is her pen name. She also has another series that I've listened to multiple times, and it's only 2 books in, but I think that it would be a really good book to have as like a light horror book. The first one's called Sparrow Hill Road, and it's about a hitchhiking ghost. And throughout the book, you see this ghost interacting with people that pick her up, and she can either like try to save them, like she knows what's going to happen, that there's going to be a crash, and that they may or may not die, and it's her trying to help them to not crash, and then if they do, she can like guide them to the afterlife. So you have these different individual stories throughout the book. And then she also runs into different types of ghosts that like poltergeists, or like there's a whole scene with a strigoi. And then she also has a friend that runs like an afterlife cafe that's right next to
like you do.
Like, yeah. So anyway, all of these issues could have a different focus, but then the end of the book, like all of these little lines of subplot come together and have a really great climax of an ending. And I think that would just be interpreted really, really well as maybe like an 8-issue comic series.
I enjoy that you've already you've made the plan. We just need to pitch it to a publisher.
Yeah. Get Shannon McGuire on board. Just buy our cat some treats. It'll be fine.
It's like, Kate did the work for you. We just need you to hire everyone to make it a reality.
Just pay for it, please.
It'll be great.
I see on this list Skyrim. What's the Skyrim concept?
Oh, the concept is Skyrim is amazing and should be in everything ever. I really want this just because the world is it's just a robust fantasy world that would be really visually cool to have. It's already visually cool in the video games, but I would love more stories set in that world. But, and here's the big but, I don't want it to be about a beefy white boy doing beefy white boy things. I don't even want it to be a beefy boy, because we have so many comics about these beefy hero characters. You know what I mean? Like that very specific fantasy male hero type. And I'm just like...
Wait, it's not even comics. I read an article recently about how the Oscars are irrelevant because they're always going to pick the stories about the dudes on their quest or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I hate that this is right.
Yeah.
Like, ew. So it's not just comics. It's lots of media.
Yeah, and I'm like, I think I'd be okay with the Skyrim thing that's about a male hero as long as it's just not about him being, this jacked, muscly, strong boy. Like, if it was, like, about this, like, nerdy wizard, I'd be into that. Like,
they did that. It's called Harry Potter.
yeah, exactly. And I love it. And I love it, Kara.
Actually,
yeah.
that's actually, no, that's a lie. Harry Potter's not the nerd. He's the jock. Hermione's the nerd, and she's the only reason he passed school.
That's true. She really pulls them through. She's the only reason he doesn't die.
I know.
So
we're back to Potter, folks. Sorry, it's always going to happen.
It's a circle. It all comes back. But yeah, I would especially love to have a female center, like, heroed book for Skyrim, because I think that would be very cool. It would be very easy to do because turns out you can pick your gender when you're building your character and it doesn't have to be a boy. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. Mind blown.
I don't play video games, but I remember very vividly when Skyrim came out, because basically everyone I know or follow on Twitter who does play video games was like, "What do you mean I can do anything?"
Yeah, it's incredible. I love it.
Yeah.
You can do anything. And unlike so many other big world fantasy things, you can only play as the one character, and the one character is, of course, a man. And especially more so back then, that it was I don't know, it was a big deal to me at the time. And I still love that game deeply.
Hashtag representation matters.
Yeah.
Yep.
Got another one by Scott Westerfeld I'd like to see in comic form. It's his Leviathan series, and it's 3 prose books that I really loved. It's got a male and female protagonist that are younger, like 12 or 13, I want to say. And it's an alt history about the beginning of World War I. And it's kind of got a steampunk aspect to it. So one side has animals that they have like messed with their genetics, and they're now like weapons or ships. And the other side has like large like mechanics, like gigantic. Like I think there might be steam powered mechanics. Don't quote me on that, but and I just want to see like the art of these kids running around on, like, I think it's a whale that flies. It's like a ship is built on the back of the whale, but it is an airship.
That sounds amazing.
All right. I have one more that just came to me, actually. So bear with me here on this. There are several series of children's books that Disney animated into films, including The Rescuers and The Great Mouse Detective.
Are you serious? I didn't know those were books first.
I didn't know either until the other day when I was watching them on Disney Plus and saw at the title credits based on a series of children's books by. So both of these properties were done around the time when Disney was kind of having their Disney is dead, but we haven't done Little Mermaid yet slump in the 70s and 80s. But I love them so much. And they both just happen to be about mice duos who go on adventures. Yeah. And I know I just said
Rescuers is amazing.
It's so good and so moody and weird.
Yep.
So I love both of these movies, and I realize that they're both about mice duos, and I realize that I also said earlier in this episode that I'm over origin stories, and that The Rescuers and Great Mouse Detective are both origin stories, but that just means that they're set up for additional adventures with these mice duos. In the case of The Great Mouse Detective, the very thinly veiled Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson characters, and then in The Rescuers, Bernard the janitor and Bianca the gorgeous diplomat who go around saving children who need to be saved. And I cannot tell you how much I love mice duos going on adventures in the greater human world. So I want to see more comic book series of these characters having their adventures. Give it a good creative team. Don't talk down to the kids. You didn't do it when you had child abduction in both of these movies. So just let these mice go on their adventures in their respective series. Rescuers already had a sequel in the 90s with Rescuers Down Under, so I know you can make more stories with these characters. Do the thing. Give me more of what I want, Disney, please. Comic books are cheap. You can do this. You don't have to make a whole show. I'll accept a graphic novel of the adventures of Bernard and Bianca. I am very deep into this thought now. Before we wrap up, do either of you have any other universes you would like to see in comic book form?
I mean, that really wraps it up. I'm going to think of fantasy series I love and want to see after we end, but honestly, it's all kind of variations on theme, right? That we want to see these big worlds in these visually dynamic characters and these stories that aren't usually told, right? Is the kind of the thing we keep coming back to.
So I get the last word with Rescuers and Great Mouse Detective.
I will say that I really
we're just going to skate right past the fact that you were recently watching these, which is amazing, and you're living your best life.
Much. I am living my best life. Disney Plus is the best thing that's happened to me. It's just terrible for my productivity. Like, all I want to do is be able to have access to Disney movies at all times, and they gave it to me. I have to pay for it, but like, meh.
Yeah.
I will say that I really like that direct to original graphic novel is becoming a thing with formats that comics can be in, because it means that a story doesn't necessarily have to have like 12 to 16 good story beats for it to be a comic, even though a lot of our examples did have them.
Yeah.
No, it's great. We're living in a great time to be alive if you like nerdy media of any kind. So let's just keep that train rolling.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening for our show today. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow Kate at Kate L. Fear, me at Kara S. Zam, and the show at IRCB Podcast. We post and share comic news, art, sass, and more.
The show is powered by fans like you on Patreon. Find our Patreon at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. Join for exclusive audio, articles, previews of the schedule, access to early access to top of my posts, and more. Our Goodreads group is a lovely community of comic book friends. Join our yearly reading challenge, which is being developed for this year, and comment on our weekly threads. Check it out at ircbpodcast.com/Goodreads.
And you can also head over to ircbpodcast.com for our pronunciation guide, Discord server, zines, merch, and everything else IRCB. If you haven't already, please rate and review our show, 5 stars, if you will, on iTunes and beyond, and we'll read your review on the next episode. You can email the show with what you've been reading, recipes, corrections, and so on at ircbpodcast@gmail.com.
You can also email us at that address if you have zine submissions. Infinity Shred is the best. They do our music. Xander is a wizard who also happens to edit our show. And thank you again for joining us for this week's episode. Until next time, comics are good, and so are you.